Hi everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I want to take you on a tour of my bookshelves. I've limited myself to the bookshelves here in the living room and to my cookbook shelf in the dining room. There's a lot of great stuff on my bookshelves upstairs, but at the time that I'm filming this it's just a little bit too dark to really get good footage of them, so maybe at some point I'll have to do a separate book tour video of my bookshelves upstairs. So, wow. Do you want to be the star of this show? I'm telling you, every video I make, this one wants to come and scream and be the star of the video. You can help me give the bookshelf tour. This is Brig. I think I've already introduced her, but you know, you can introduce her again. So, my bookshelves are not like the ones you might see on established booktube channels with genre coordination or color coordination. They don't look kind of like aesthetic and pretty. They really are just chaos. I've just tossed books on in whatever way I find them. I read them and I put them back in a different place. There's no strategy to it whatsoever, but there are a lot of good things in there. So I'm just going to take you through each shelf. I'll pan over the shelf and then I'll show you a couple of books that I really want to highlight on each shelf. So let's go to the bookshelves. So I decided to start off this book tour with the bookshelf that's probably the most chaotic. It's you'll notice that it's only about like 3/4 full and everything is just kind of shoved in wherever. There's a bunch of empty spaces and there's not really books in them. I just stacked books everywhere. And that's because that bookshelf is on its way out. I got that bookshelf when I moved into my first place after grad school, and I got it for super cheap from Goodwill, and after all these years now, like, the shelves are starting to buckle and the back is starting to come away, and it's really time to replace that shelf with a different shelf, or even just siphon books off onto other shelves if I have space. A lot of those books need to be unhauled. They're books I've had for years and some of them I haven't even read. So that's why that shelf is so chaotic. But I chose a couple of books from that top shelf for you that I wanted to highlight. This is one of my favorite nonfiction books about books. It's by Nicholas Basbanes and it's called A Splendor of Letters. And he actually wrote a trilogy of books about books and the way that books shape us and the way that writing shapes us and the way that books get preserved through the years or not preserved. And that's what this book is about. It's about book preservation and how books survive or don't survive. And it's really fascinating. It's great for anybody who wants to really get into the process of books and book collecting and book preservation. Really interesting. Then I found another nonfiction book. This is one of my favorite books. It's called Radical Homemakers, and the subtitle is Reclaiming Domesticity from a Consumer Culture. And it's just a very anti-capitalist book about what it means to want to homestead or stay at home when you maybe don't fit the profile of somebody who would do so. And it really spoke to me when I kind of started my homesteading after I left my teaching job. So I really enjoyed this book. This book also has a lot of bite marks from my cats, so that's embarrassing. And then here's a third nonfiction book. We had a lot of nonfiction books in here. And this book is really mostly interesting. It's called The Overachievers. I got it at a used bookstore. And it's about a high school that is in the county where I grew up. It was not the high school that I went to, but it was in the county where I grew up, and it's about this super competitive, high-pressure high school where people are really encouraged to do everything possible to overachieve, hence the title. And so the person who wrote this, the journalist who wrote this, really gets into how these kind of environments affect kids and what it means for them to achieve. And it's a really interesting book and just kind of scary thinking how I grew up in this atmosphere even though I didn't go to this school. And then the last book, I just like to highlight my copy of The Silmarillion, which is my favorite Tolkien novel. I just love The Silmarillion, so that's all about that. I just love it. So one of the things I noticed when I was just panning turning the camera across that second shelf on that bookshelf was that there are a lot of books on that shelf that I've had since high school or early college. So that's a shelf that I really need to unhaul a lot of, because a lot of those books, even if I loved them when I was younger, I probably don't love them so much anymore. There was a very specific style of like late 90s, early 2000s teen writing that I think I would find fairly eye-rolling now. But I did want to share a few books from that shelf. One is just this humor book. It's called the Lutheran Handbook, and it has like funny things and also serious things. Like they do give you like Luther facts and things like that, but then they also just have like funny things like what to bring for a church potluck by region, and it's like a humorous version, how to survive for 1 hour in an unair-conditioned church, and then it's just a bunch of like theology in here, but it's also like a humor book about Lutherans. And because I'm a Lutheran and I work for a Lutheran church, I got this in, I think, high school, and it really just like makes me chuckle when I see it. Then I have here, this is my battered old copy of my favorite of the C.S. Lewis books, which is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. You can see it's basically broken in half. It's so fallen apart. It's been read, I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens of times, and will be read probably dozens more. So I really like this. I love that this book, a lot of books on my shelf have shown their love. I tend to buy books used and then use them pretty hard after that. So, but this is, I love books that kind of show that they've had a nice life. And then this book, I'm just gonna take this Post-it note off for a minute. My dad gave me this book. It's the Bernie Sanders book, A Guide to Political Revolution. And my dad is a huge Bernie Sanders fan. Hi Dad, he watches these videos. He's gonna be mad at me that I still have this book because, as you can see, I was supposed to pass it on, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. So he's made a list here on the front of the book, and he has my mom's name, and then he said to read and give it to me and Noah. Then it says, Florence and Noah, when you're finished, give it to Sarah. And then there's a note to Sarah that says, read it, pass it on, asking that person also to pass it on until everyone in America has read this. So I'm really sorry, Dad, that I have not yet finished this and passed it on. Maybe this should be on my February TBR. So that third shelf has more of our like older fantasy books and just another hodgepodge of stuff that Noah and I have accumulated over the years. I didn't really choose anything from those categories, but I chose just like 3 kind of unconventional, interesting books to look at from that shelf. This is one. It's one of the Foxfire books. I love the Foxfire books as someone who's interested in like old craftsmanship and like homesteading and off-the-grid self-sufficiency type stuff. That stuff just really interesting to me. And these are like collections of like random skills, and sometimes it's not like a step-by-step, they're just like narratives and interviews. And so this one says, animal care, banjos and dulcimers, hide tanning, summer and fall wild plant foods, butter churns, ginseng, and still more affairs of plain living. And I have several of these books. A couple of them were a gift from a friend, and there's just a lot of interesting stuff here if you're just interested in the way that people used to do things. It's really fun to read. And then this is one of my very favorite things that I found. As you're gonna learn, the more you get to know me, I am an avid collector of like Lewis Carroll, Alice in Wonderland type of like paraphernalia. It's just one of my favorite things. It's my favorite book. And so I kind of look for interesting Lewis Carroll stuff everywhere I go. And I went to a used bookstore recently, and I found this book. There's nothing on the cover. It's just called Lewis Carroll's Library. And it's actually just like an auction list, like an itemized list of all of the books that Lewis Carroll owned. And so you can, it was like after his death when his personal effects were being like auctioned off, And so you can just flip through the book and you can just see everything that he owned when he was writing all of his seminal works. And I just think that's super fascinating. It was one of those things where I knew that, like, there might not be as many people interested in that kind of, like, minutiae type of thing, but this stuff just, like, just has my name all over it. I am kind of a collector of that kind of stuff. Then I also have this book. I used to dance growing up, and so I'm always interested in, like, cool dance-related books, and this one's called The Dancer's World, and it's like a photo book, like a coffee table book, and it just has, like, photos from behind the scenes in, like, dance companies, just, like, older photos, and I think it is so cool. I haven't actually, like, gone through and read it yet, but it's really cool just to flip through it and just look at all the pictures, because it does give you kind of an intimate look of a dancer's world, exactly what it says. So I'm looking forward to, like, actually reading the text of this book one day. I think I also got this at a used bookstore. So for that last shelf in the kind of old decrepit bookcase that I have over there, I have another 3 books to share. Actually, a lot of books on that shelf are books that I'm planning to unhaul, books that have been sitting there for a long time, but there are a few really cool ones that I wanted to share, including one that I got recently, and that's this one from the used bookstore. It's kind of hefty, so I really have to hoist it up. This is The World's Greatest Wine Estates, and it's by Robert M. Parker Jr., who, from what I know of him, I'm not super sure that he and I are going to agree a lot on wine, but I think in general, like, a listing of the great wine estates of the world is a good book to have. And so one of the things that I'm doing in 2022 is I'm studying for kind of a wine certification, just to learn more about wine, because I work in a winery, and this book is not needed to study for that, but I'm always looking for, like, more books about wine and, like, more interesting facts about wine. So I got this book at the used bookstore, very excited to read it. Maybe this will be on my February TBR. I can also weightlift with it when I have a chance. Then the next book is The Annotated Hobbit, and I really love this annotated edition of The Hobbit. It's really cool. It's got, you know, the regular story here, and that has the annotations on the side, and it also has just, like, really cool little illustrations, like a little extra type of stuff in there. And The Hobbit was the first of the Tolkien books that I read, so it holds a special place in my heart, and I really love having a nice annotated version. And then the last book I also got, excuse me, at a used bookstore, and it is called The Dictionary of Imaginary Places, and it's kind of like a little fantasy. It says dictionary, but I would say more of like an encyclopedia, a fantasy encyclopedia. And you can just look up all different kinds of things. I mean, it won't have every fantasy thing. This book was published in 1980, so it may be a little out of date, but for, like, kind of older fantasy stuff, it's a really cool thing to have. Plus, it just, like, looks nice just, like, sitting on your shelf. You know, it looks like a nice old tome that you have sitting here where you could open it up and, like, see a magical place. So that's another one of my favorite books from that. So now we move on to the other bookshelf, the other main bookshelf that is in the living room, and that's kind of behind where Noah sits at his little desk. And I don't go back there very often, although there's a lot of good books on that shelf. From that first shelf that you saw, there's really one main book that I want to show you, and it's this one. It's Zingerman's Guide to Good Eating, and I love this book because Noah got this book for me as a present. He used to live in Michigan, so he was very familiar with Zingerman's, the deli that is referenced in this book, and it's just a really cool way to learn about different kinds of food and get kind of a basic knowledge of kind of gourmet food or just food in general. Today's actually Noah's and my 9-year anniversary of our civil wedding, So we've been married in some way, shape, or form for 9 years now, and so I thought it was cool, especially on this occasion, to show a gift that Noah got me years and years ago, and I love it. So then there's a couple of books on that next shelf that really speak to me for a variety of different reasons. And the first one is this one. It's a book by Anthony Bourdain, and it's called The Nasty Bits. And I love, once again, Brig, you come in and meow right at this moment because you love to be on camera. The Nasty Bits is a book by Anthony Bourdain, and I have loved Anthony Bourdain for a long time. I think watching his shows, No Reservations and Parts Unknown, and even A Cook's Tour back when I was in college, really kind of solidified how I think about traveling and how I think about food and how I think about interacting with people. And so I really, really, really enjoy reading his writing. And so this is just one of his books. I also have others of his, but this is one I picked out just to highlight. And then the other book from that shelf is called Lost at School. And the subtitle is Why Our Kids with Behavioral Challenges Are Falling Through the Cracks and How We Can Help Them. This book, and I've said this in many an interview, and you can see that this book is getting a little bit dog-eared. When I was teaching, if someone in an interview asked me what books have kind of formatively changed how you view teaching, the one I would always say was Lost at School. And the whole point of Lost at School is that kids who are having behavioral challenges don't want to have behavior challenges, you know? They're not doing it because, like, they're bad or because they want to hurt you or they want, you know, to be punished. There's none of that. There's a skills deficit, and the premise of the book is that kids who are struggling in school have a skills deficit, and if they were able to learn what the skill was that they needed, they would choose to do that instead of to do whatever they're doing. And I found that to be true when I was teaching, that there was something that a student was struggling with, like a certain social skill or emotional skill, or even like an executive function type skill, and if you were able to target that instead of kind of personally viewing their behavior, if you taught them what to do instead, they would choose to do that instead because they don't want their teachers and their parents and their friends to be upset with them. But it's easy when, especially because I was working with classrooms for kids who had been transferred from other classrooms due to their behavior, and frequently for me, because of the types of classrooms that I wanted to work in, it was kids who had been transferred from a general education classroom to a special education classroom to a more restrictive special education classroom to a more restrictive special education classroom until they got to my classroom, which was basically as far as they could go. And so the whole point is that the kid didn't want to make people upset with them. They didn't want to have to transfer schools 6 times in 5 years, you know. They wanted to succeed, and this book is about how you teach them how. So anybody who has kids, or is a teacher, or is a psychology professional who works with kids who are struggling with behavior, I would highly recommend that they read this book. I have bonded with parents of my students over this book, so I think it's really a very useful book to read about how kids struggle at school and how you can help them. Bookshelf that I have in the living room is only half a bookshelf. The other half of the shelf has all of my music, and you know, if you're all interested, one day I'll do a tour of my music shelves, but for now that's kind of outside the scope of this video. But that first shelf, that top shelf that you just saw, is the only shelf in the living room that's like themed, and that's because it's where all of my children's books live. And pretty much almost all of these books, except for a couple that I bought for classroom libraries or, you know, just for my own kids, are books that I've had since I was a child. So here are a few favorites. This is I Feel Bad for My Mom. This is Florence and Eric Take the Cake. And I say I feel bad for my mom, although she was the one who chose to name her child Florence. But she was very much of the mind that she wanted her kids to have books with characters that had their names. But of course, because of the popularity of our names, she had a lot of an easier time finding books with characters named Sarah than books with characters named Florence. But she did find this one, Florence and Eric Take the Cake, which is a very silly story about, you know, this family and I think it's the grandmother. Yeah, she makes a cake, and the cake looks just like a hat, and then it gets mixed up with an actual hat, and someone comes to pick it up, and they have to figure out what to do, and it's just a cute little book, and it has the main character's name is Florence, so there's that. Then I like this one. This is, it's a children's storybook version of Robert Frost's Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening, and it's absolutely gorgeously illustrated. And this is probably one of the first poems that I ever heard because of this book, and I just think it's a beautiful book. I think it's just like, it's a little treasure, it really helps kind of get you acquainted with poetry, and so I will probably treasure this one for the rest of my life, and it's held up very well considering how many times I've read it. And then this book, this might be my favorite children's book. I just think it's so witty and adorable, and I didn't read this when I was a child. I read this when I was an adult and then bought it because I thought it was so cute. So this is called The Boy Who Didn't Believe in Spring. It's by Lucille Clifton, and it's about a boy and his friend, and they're walking around New York City, and he's talking about how he doesn't believe in spring. And so he and his friend are walking around, and they start seeing little signs of spring, and he doesn't believe it's spring, and he doesn't believe it's spring, and then he sees this bird's nest, and he realizes that it's spring. And it's just so cute. I love the way it's written. I love the way the kids are talking. It's, I don't know, it's very authentic to the way that kids talk, and I just think it's adorable. So I went out and bought this book after I read it, maybe one of my kids when I was teaching got it out of the library, and I read it to them, and I thought it was so cute that I went back and bought it for myself. But it's such an adorable book. And then the last one is this children's treasury copy of Alice in Wonderland, which is the first Alice in Wonderland edition that I ever read. And so this is what started it all. This is what got me into Lewis Carroll and Alice in Wonderland, and I've just never stopped since then. And again, it's holding up very well. The dust jacket is a little scuffed, but other than that, it's going to hang on for more years, and maybe my own children one day will get to experience the joy of Lewis Carroll starting with that book. Shelf, I have a couple of books I want to share, and the first one is this one, The Body Keeps the Score. The subtitle is Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma. Back a couple of years ago when I went through a bit of a traumatic event, or a series maybe of traumatic events, someone bought me this book and sent it to me, and I'm embarrassed to say that I haven't read it yet, but what I do know of the book is that it speaks very well of kind of what happens when you kind of hold trauma in your body, and how the brain and the body process difficult life events. So I'm still really excited to read this book. I'll probably read it soon. Again, I say maybe it'll be on my February TBR. And then again, because it's Noah's and my anniversary, I had to share this book. I got this at Borders a long time ago, and it's called A Lovely Love Story, and it's just this cute little illustrated book about like these two dinosaurs, and Noah and I have always had like a running joke around our relationship about like us being dinosaurs, and we have these alternate like personalities that are dinosaurs. It's really hard to explain, but it talks about there's a fierce dinosaur was trapped in a cave of ice, and then another dinosaur, the lovely other dinosaur, comes and she like unfreezes his cave of ice, and that they're very different dinosaurs, but they love each other, and then it ends. Here's how it ends. Let's see. It says, "And that, my friends, is how it is with love. Let us all be dinosaurs and lovely other dinosaurs together. For the sun is warm and the world is a beautiful place." And we read this book and we were like, it's us as dinosaurs. And so I love this. When I think about us, you know, being married for 9 years and being together for even longer than that, I just look at this book and I'm like, the dinosaur in the cave of ice and his lovely other dinosaur. So that brings me back lots of warm memories of the beginning of our relationship. So then the last shelf that I'm going to go through on my bookshelf that's over there, that's why I'm looking over there. There's actually one more shelf before you get to like the full shelves of music, but the books on that shelf are kind of, there's like some overflow loose sheet music that's like stacked up and covering the books, and I'm not really sure that I want to unearth all of that right now, so we're just going to do this last shelf before we go for our one final shelf which I want to tour, which is my cookbook shelf. And so there's two books from that last shelf in the living room that I want to share with all of you. And the first one is, I read this when I was in college, it's called Ramayana, A Journey, and it is like an illustrated version of the Ramayana, and I just really love this book. When I was in college, I had a religious studies minor. It was undeclared, but I basically fulfilled the criteria for a religious studies minor. My intention was actually to study Judaism as my focus, but I ended up taking a Hinduism class because that was what fit in my schedule, and I just became obsessed with Hinduism and just kind of learning about Hinduism, which is not a religion that I had been taught very much about earlier in my life. And so after I left college, I kept this edition of the Ramayana, and I really love it. And it reminds me of college, it reminds me of my religious studies minor. Religion, not Hinduism, but religion became my career later, and so it's kind of nice to remember how all of that started, which is just studying different religions and being interested in religion. And then the last book is J.R.R. Tolkien's edition of Beowulf, translated, edited by Christopher Tolkien. And when this came out, Noah and I just knew immediately that we had to get it, and we don't regret it. It's an awesome book. So it just kind of adds to our full collection of Tolkien-based literature, and it's just a really cool book to have. So it was really hard to choose which books I wanted to highlight from my cookbook shelf, which, as you can see, is sizable. I love cookbooks, I love collecting cookbooks, I love interesting cookbooks, and I cook from them, and, you know, just like my mom did when I was growing up. Let's see if I can find here. Can I find where I've done this? This is funny if I mention it and then I don't. Yeah, here we go. So just like my mom did when I was growing up, I write the date that I cooked something, and then if I cook it again, I write all the subsequent dates, and I can see every time that I've cooked something. And so, you know, I really do get a lot of use out of them, and I really do enjoy and love all of my cookbooks. But I did choose 3 to share with you right now. And actually, we'll start with that one I was just holding. This might be my favorite cookbook of all time. This is called Fallen Cloudberries, and it's by Tessa Quiros. and it has recipes from around the world, but all related to her family in some way. So there's family stories, there's beautiful photography, all the colors are wonderful, these stuffed vegetables are beautiful. I apologize if you can hear my cat scratching around in the background. Embarrassing. And it's just a beautiful cookbook. The recipes, they're easy to make, and it's just so evocative, and I really love it. I got this when I moved into my first apartment in grad school. I bought this, I think, when I was working at Borders, and I'm just obsessed with it. I just love it so much. And then this also has a special place in my heart, and it is New Recipes from Moosewood Restaurant. And I really love Moosewood. I went with my parents to Ithaca, New York, and we went to Moosewood for the first time, and then for the first couple of years of our relationship, Noah and I would go to Ithaca in the winter on vacation, and we would also go to Moosewood. In fact, the day that Noah and I surprised my parents by announcing that we were engaged, my mom was going to make a recipe from this Moosewood cookbook, but she ended up not being able to because I think the eggplant that she had was bad. And so we ended up going out to eat. But even like my engagement story has a Moosewood recipe involved in it somehow. And so it's just so close to my heart. And I love cooking from this cookbook. I've cooked a lot of stuff from here, and I'm excited to go back and try some of the recipes that I haven't tried yet. And then the last one is this little tiny booklet called Traditional Recipes of Lucasian Farmers. Lucca is a small town in Italy. It's kind of just outside Florence, and when I lived in Italy, I went to Lucca, I went to Florence on my spring break, and then I was like, well, I'm gonna go on some day trips besides going to Florence. So the first day trip I took a train out to Lucca, and it's this really cool, like, walled city, like ancient walled city basically, and I loved it there. I could have stayed there forever. In fact, I sometimes wonder if maybe I should have stayed there and then gone to Florence, but, you know, hindsight. And I actually bought this book as a gift for Noah, because he didn't go with me on that trip. He went on a different trip for spring break, and so I brought him this as, like, a souvenir from my trip to Lucca. And I think we've cooked from this book, and it's in English, but it has traditional kind of Tuscan recipes, and it's just a great book, and then again, another great memento for our anniversary. So that is all. That's my bookshelf tour. If you have any questions about any of the books that maybe I didn't talk about, feel free to ask them. I'm sure I'll do another bookshelf tour. Like I said, I have to unhaul a large number of books that I'm no longer reading, or that I got lent to me by other people or as presents from other people, but that aren't really, a lot of the books that I have right now are kind of on their way somewhere else. They're like a wayside, I'm a wayside on their journey to somewhere else. They were never meant to be a part of my permanent collection, and there are lots of other books that I really want to be part of my permanent collection. So I have a feeling I'll do another one of these bookshelf tours at some point, because my collection is going to noticeably change. So stay tuned for that, and we have another video coming out on Thursday, and then I think another video maybe coming out later in the week. So I hope you enjoy. Happy reading.